Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fully Charged podcast. I just want to clarify things, as I've been making a right mess with my introductions recently with not knowing, because we keep changing the name of the channel. We're not changing the name of the podcast. It's just the Fully Charged podcast. Always has been and always will be. And you just have to accept that occasionally the founder and doddery-headed old fool gets a bit confused. So we put this podcast out on ordinary audio, podcast distribution systems. But we also put it on YouTube. So most people listen to it, but it is also on YouTube, and it's on the Everything Electric channel on YouTube, our new Everything Electric channel. What else can you call it? And so, but it's still the Fully Charged podcast. End of explanation. Dull, uninteresting, unimportant to anyone outside the micro bubble of the Fully Charged show production team and all those associated with it who have suffered long hours of gentle, quiet frustration at the old Dodderer. This is a great episode because it's with an old pal of the show, extraordinary man, Roger Atkins. Roger and I have known each other for far too long than either of us would like to admit. Roger has been a regular fixture and feature and star of our live shows. He's on many panels. He is incredibly well informed about the electric vehicle transition, the challenges that are faced therein. Really knows his stuff, goes all over the world, meets everyone that is involved in this and has done for many, many years and is very involved in it. And so we have a brilliant sort of roundup discussion of what's going on with electric vehicles and the general energy transition, but kind of focused on the vehicles, I guess, a bit more. And so that is very exciting. Now, we recently released the episode on the Libby battery that has recently been launched by My Energy, the sponsor of this podcast. And I got to make this, just want to clarify a few things. I've seen a very, very few comments, but people saying that what we made for My Energy was just an advert. And it wasn't. And we weren't paid to make that episode. They didn't pay us to do that. They do support this podcast very specifically, but nothing else that we ever do on the Fully Charged show. And the episode is incredibly popular. It's had, I'll have a look. I'm going to look now. I think it's had nearly 200,000 views since we put it out the other day. 195,398 as I speak. So clearly a very popular show. It's only been out a couple of days. So the Libby battery, this is kind of like a commercial. I'm doing a commercial, but it's commercial infotainment, because it's really relevant to what we're talking about. So the Libby battery is a new system they developed, which is an inverter and battery in one single unit. If you were installing solar at your house now, and you ordered this battery, you wouldn't need an inverter. That, just to explain, if you have solar panels, you'll have an inverter, because solar energy, when you produce solar energy from sunlight on your panels, it is DC, direct current. And when you switch a kettle on in your house, it is AC, alternating current. And so you need a box of gizmos, and hopefully with a little flashing light on it, because that always makes it much better, that converts DC to AC. It's called an inverter. It also can do it the other way around. And they're in all electric cars have them. Inverters are everywhere. They're a bit like routers in the internet. Everywhere, everyone needs an inverter. Like we all need routers. Or, as we would say in the United States, routers. But I don't know how you say inverter in America, because it would just be inverter. Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent. I'm really trying to stick. It says in my notes, stick to the topic. Don't go off on a tangent. So, but the Libby is, because I have batteries in my house, as many people who know this podcast will know, and it makes a phenomenal difference. And it is, without question, there's no hesitation in my stating this. It is for privileged people who can afford to put a battery in the house are now benefiting enormously and unfairly in the grand scheme of things from much cheaper energy bills over a year. Because we can shift our loads and our demands. So when electricity is very expensive, I'm not paying for it because I bought it the night before when it was cheap. And that's what these batteries can do. That's in the winter. In the summer, if you've got solar, you don't pay anything. So as you may have seen in a recent episode, I managed to do 41 days completely, off the grid. It's the wrong term really, but I didn't use any grid electricity. I don't want to be off the grid. I'm very critically committed to being joined to the grid. It's really important. But the battery helps you do that. And it is an amazing step forward. And obviously, it's a hugely contentious and difficult topic at the moment due to the fact that poorer people who don't live in recently built homes that have batteries built in, solar on the roof, ground source heating, i.e. people who live for very, very little low energy expenses, even now with the increased costs. And those houses do exist and they are possible. And that is what we should be doing, because we shouldn't be being ripped off by, I can't help it. I don't want to be political, but Shell have just made, I think it's 3 or 4 billion pounds profit this quarter, not this year, this quarter. Profit, extra profit on top of their already massive profits. And we're not, obviously, this government aren't taxing them because this government are corrupt. It's just a simple statement of fact. It's not even an opinion. But that aside, there are technologies that have been developed over the last 25 to 30 years that work. I've just seen a whole string of tweets from someone going, the technology isn't ready yet. And poor people have to rely on really expensive imported toxic gas. That's what he was saying. And what does he do for a living? He fits gas boilers. Every side of this argument is biased. I am biased. I am biased against burning fossil fuel. I'm open about it. I'm not being secretive or deceptive or trying to wheedle my way in. No, I think burning fossil fuel is stupid and we need to stop doing it as soon as we possibly can. And if that involves the government and private industry and the general public investing, not spending or frittering or wasting or subsidizing, spending money, developing our infrastructure so that people on low incomes can stay warm and cook their food without paying through the nose and giving that money to the richest 1% on the planet. All that money goes to them and none of it trickles down. Thank you. So that is an advert for My Energy, which I'm sure they'll be delighted with. But go and look at myenergy.com, myenergi.com, and have a look at our episode we did from their amazing R&D department and offices and their huge new factory, which is being built specifically, as I have begged and pleaded, with a series of south-facing roofs that will have, I don't know how many megawatts of solar on it. It's built to house huge, it's basically a solar farm with a factory underneath it. All new buildings should be like the one being built by My Energy. There you go. None of it. If you see a building going up, a massive warehouse with this big, fat, flat, pointless roof, and it doesn't have any solar panels on it, the people who built it are morons, knuckle-dragging scum, and they should be immediately arrested and taken to the Wembley People's Trials, where they will be re-educated. I'm joking, but they are scum. Let's get on with this week's episode because it's really good fun. And Roger is a much better waffler than me because he's much better informed. And he knows much more about particularly the automotive industry. He's clever. Oh, he's clever. That Roger. Very, very clever man. So please welcome to the Fully Charged podcast, Mr. Roger Atkins. Roger, thank you very much for joining the fabulous. I always look forward to yabbering with you on the Fully Charged podcast because you just know stuff and you remember stuff. You don't suffer that thing where I'll remember a concept and I know it's connected to a company and I'll go, the people that make the square thing with the wires.
Yeah, Rob, I wish you hadn't said this because
Oh
this
no,
is going to happen to both of us during this
yeah,
conversation.
we're going to forget the name of
Yeah,
Tesla. What's that company that bloke makes? Who does rockets?
yeah. Oh, on that note, have you been
Oh yeah,
watching the documentary series on?
yes, and it's on tonight, isn't it? The
Yeah,
last one. Yeah.
fascinating. Yeah,
No, it was.
fascinating.
It's really that's a good place to start actually because it's really brought back to me because in the last year I've just been like totally dismissive. I don't want to know anything about him. He's a nutter. He's buying Twitter. What the hell? You know, it's just I don't know. And he's saying all these weird things, and I've just sort of lost interest. And then you go back and you go, that guy is truly remarkable. What he has done is
I couldn't agree
unbelievable.
more. And if you think of what the overall electric vehicle revolution is all about, it's two things. It's about China and it's about
Yeah.
Elon Musk.
Yes.
And I think
Yes.
if the West hadn't had Elon Musk, for America and for Europe, we would be even further back
Yeah.
with Asia and China in particular than we already are. So, notwithstanding his quirkiness, if we can put it in a nice,
Yeah.
simple one-word definition,
Yeah.
we owe him everything, and
Yeah.
particularly. I'm not saying you speak for yourself, but speaking for myself, given when I started with electric vehicles and what he's done in and around the space, you know, I owe him everything because I don't think I would have been able to build what I built as a profile and the
Yeah.
workplace that I call LinkedIn had he not been the champion of the electric vehicle and all of the things that he's done. I think it would have been we would have been far away from it. So
Yeah.
notwithstanding, he is yes. What was the word?
I
Quirky.
think quirky.
Um,
Quirky is a
yeah,
good one.
he's extraordinary. He's an
Yeah.
extraordinary
Yeah.
human being.
Yes.
And yeah,
Well, and the SpaceX story, because you kind of forget as soon as something works, you
yeah,
immediately forget how incredibly difficult it was to do the things they've done. And now it's like so unremarkable. You send a rocket up, it shoots its cargo out into space, it comes back down and lands where, and you go, well, it's just normal. Why? I mean, it's like leaning your bike up against your house. It's nothing
yes,
special,
yeah.
and it's a
Well,
remarkable achievement.
you and I, Rob, are of that vintage where we would have seen as young men, young boys, the
Yeah,
moon landings, all
yeah,
the Apollo missions, and of course they weren't without failure on occasion.
no,
Sad
terrible
and
and
dreadful
terrible
things happen.
losses at times. Yeah,
Yeah, but this is the story of the challenge of making anything better and different is to
yeah,
deal and cope with failure, is to
yeah,
not let failure stop you. And I think whether it's in a kind of countrywide thing or a corporation or an individual thing, anyone's personal life, things will happen to you.
yeah,
You might have a physical thing happen, whatever you want to call it, or occasional, moments where your life doesn't work out. I mean, I don't want to pry into your life, but my own life, I'm quite prepared to admit this. I have had some tremendous downs as well as
oh
ups.
heavens,
These last few years, extremely grateful to all of the opportunities and things I've been able to do.
yeah,
But in my, late teens and early 20s, I didn't have a great time.
no,
I even did
yeah,
that pretty difficult thing. Well, I'm not quite sure how to define it, but that moment where you really think there is nothing for you in life, and you do something bad. I think you know the word.
yeah, yeah,
I even did that, and thank God I was rubbish at it and failed
right,
because I wouldn't be here now.
yeah,
But,
yeah,
so that journey for all of us of failure and success, of
yeah,
trying and failing, of starting and stopping, of winning and losing,
yeah,
that's the stuff of life.
yeah,
And I think that the more and we've all collectively had to do that with certainly the pandemic and other things going on now. Cope with things that we'd rather not be happening, but,
yeah.
but that's life.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I think what the history of Elon Musk it really shows us is it's that writ large. When he failed, it was spectacular. It was massive explosions. It was horrendous disasters. Whereas I failed because someone nicked my bike and I got depressed, and then I fell over and hurt myself, or whatever it was. Or
Yeah,
relationships broke up and I said the wrong thing. I've acres of that in life. But to have something go so phenomenally wrong that you spend billions of pounds making a rocket and then it blows up and you go,
yeah,
oh, well, let's make another one. I mean, that side of it, in a way, is almost more remarkable that they've managed to do what they've done. With the SpaceX story is almost, I mean, just to reiterate that we've both been watching a very well put together documentary series on the BBC in the UK, which I'm not sure how hard or easy it is to see overseas, but it's very well done and interviews people that you are really, I never expected them to. So obviously his mum, but then Tallulah Riley, his double-time ex-wife, he's very level-headed and straightforward and honest about him, and paints him as a very sensitive and interesting man, not a, I mean, considering they've got divorced twice, she's very empathetic towards him.
Yeah, well, I think because she can see the bigger picture, notwithstanding what he is with all his flaws, she can see, as any of them close to him can see, the bigger picture of what he's trying to do. He's got enough money and resources to go and have the greatest time and fun in the world, but he's dedicating his life to something he believes in, this principle of, making a cleaner, greener, better planet, etc. I mean, the thing about trying to scoot off to other planets, I'm not so sure about that. But I find that a little bit sort of slightly don't quite get with that one. But all the other stuff, you can't but applaud it. I mean, it seems pretty selfless. He doesn't seem to be, the archetypal capitalist just wanting and focusing on personal greed, wealth, and all of that. It's all for a purpose, which is pretty unique.
Yes, because I wouldn't mind doing a rounder because you're so good. You got your finger on the pulse. You've always got your finger on the pulse of the automotive industry. But just because I've had numerous conversations recently about, particularly sort of focused on the European car market, the car makers first, and my awareness, I think, through the stuff we're doing with Elliot in China, and then the stuff we know is arriving, and the conversations we're having with the car makers, which I'm sure you're doing, of the imminent arrival of Chinese cars in Europe, and not one or two, but a lot of them from a lot of different companies, and the challenge that is to the European car makers. If they're not dragging their feet, they're not exactly rushing. Maybe VW, but the rest of them.
Well, the challenge here, I think, Rob, is in a couple of areas. A principal one is in supply chain, and particularly around the battery. Because China has such dominance in battery production and raw material supply chains, they are in a stronger position to build at volume, whereas the European and Americans at the moment are somewhat inhibited by that because they still haven't built the battery factories. They take time. They still haven't finalized the supply chain. That takes time. And therefore, the capacity constraint for Europe and America around building EVs is pronounced. And in China, less so. Doesn't mean they can build what they like in whatever quantity. They equally have some challenge. But I think what's going to surprise people is the level of sophistication. And by that, I mean good quality products with a proposition behind them that's now starting to arrive. I went to the NIO launch a couple of weeks ago in Berlin, which was essentially to drive the ET7, which is an extremely nice saloon car. Thank God, Rob, not another SUV. Can I be honest? I'm really bored of SUVs.
Yeah, no, me too. Well, we've been going on about it for a long time. Yeah.
I know they're a big thing, but I'm just bored. But anyway, so the NIO launch was very interesting. Number one, it's a Chinese brand coming to Europe. Number two, very different in that they're proposing battery swapping as part of the
in that car too, because I mean at the moment the only one they do the swapping is the really big SUV. If I'm
they can do it on all of them, Rob.
They can do all of them. Okay,
every NIO. This is the whole point of the big point of what they're doing. The other significant thing was they've come to the market not selling the cars. They've come with a subscription model, so you don't buy the car, you subscribe to it. Partly because they don't want you to own the battery, because they want to own and manage the battery and give you the flexibility to have a long-range battery when you need it, a shorter-range battery when you need it, and pay for whatever you need at that time. And equally, I think we've only scratched the surface around, well, what is a battery switch station? Is it just a thing to facilitate a quick, swap and drop thing? Or is it a bit more than that? And it appears to be a lot more than that.
Actually, I would say so.
Rob, it's about managing energy locally. It's about taking a bunch of batteries and using them 24/7, Because
Yep.
on the face of it, people think, well, this is wasteful. If we've got a battery shortage, why do we want a great big clunky
Pile of them.
swap
Yeah.
shop with all these batteries hanging around in it? Well, there's the point. They're not hanging around in it.
Right.
They're doing something. They're being charged, discharged, integrating with the grid, so on and so forth. So, and if you go across then to China, as Elliot beautifully illustrates in his
Yeah.
videos, this is now a huge proposition. It's being supported by the government. You have other players like Geely, Shanghai Automotive, building this out. They're integrating with some of the big companies out, even outside of our world, if you like,
Right.
even dare I say Shell, Sinopec. So companies who manage energy, traditional energy, hydrocarbons, they're even working with those companies to look at how this can, morph, can kind of evolve into the bigger infrastructure of fueling vehicles and managing energy.
Right.
It's a lot more than meets the eye, Rob. Let's just
Yeah.
put it like that.
But I mean, that single story alone, I think, is a massive challenge to all the established car makers in Europe and in North America, really. But we can get to them in a bit. But the fact that, that this was tried, I remember talking to you about it, Better Place, which is an Israeli company. I was like, well, I mean, very legitimately tried to create a battery swapping system in Europe with Renault, wasn't it? With
Well, indeed,
Renault.
the Renault Fluence. But I had Shai Agassi on my podcast, actually. He was my first guest, the Electric and Eclectic podcast.
Yeah.
And I've known Shai since 2007 because I met him at the time and so on and so forth. He was a kind of contemporary of Elon Musk.
Yes.
For battery swapping. And at the time, in many ways, Shai was more famous than Elon Musk was at that time.
He was the big name at that time.
He was an A-lister, on all the talk shows, all this stuff and whatever. And through a bundle of things, without unpicking it all, it kind of didn't work out, $800-900 million later with investments and people. It all comes to, it seems nothing. But ironically, some of the IP and technology that NIO are using actually came from Better Place.
Wow. Oh, that's interesting. Right.
I know. I think it's very significant. But can I bring up a slightly, it's a sort of prickly subject. Do you mind if I bring up something early on?
Please do.
Okay. So we talk about China, dominance in supply chain, battery manufacturer. We're now talking about some of the brands and cars coming over here. The bit that I find is the really difficult scenario is that in the same way as Russia was our inverted commas friend for a long time, were Germany especially, but many European countries relied heavily on its energy, on the gas pipeline, etc., and for many other things. And we believed that we had this globalized, integrated, relatively cooperative world. It then changes because of the geopolitics, the illegal invasion of Ukraine. If there's such a thing as a legal invasion, I don't know.
I don't think I've never heard of one.
When it comes to some of what the West has done, of course.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, the point I want to come to, Rob, is that with all of this effort and ambition of Chinese manufacturers and reliance at the moment on the supply chains out of China, what would happen if there was an incursion of any significance with Taiwan and China? What would that mean? So, I mean, it's not really a very nice thing to think about because, it would be extraordinarily challenging for everybody, both the Chinese companies that we're talking about, some of them, and for the, the bigger picture, world politics, etc. So I don't want to dwell on it, and I'm not saying, it's going to happen, but we all know it sits there as a potential.
It's in the foreground. Actually, it's not even in the background. It is in the foreground. And I mean, I think the critically important thing that I keep having to remind myself, as well as numerous commenters that we get on YouTube, and I think it's legit. I never would criticize them, but people who said, "How can you support China?" By making these shows. Well, I don't think we're supporting China, but I do think we're illustrating the fact that we're mind-bogglingly reliant on them, and that didn't happen this month, last year, 10 years ago. It happened 40 years ago. It happened as China kind of re-entered the global community, if you like, because it had been like same as Russia. I mean, we embraced Russia after perestroika. In some ways, to exploit them, to exploit the natural resources. There was certainly that was, give us your oil and your gas, and we won't. I don't
Yeah,
know what else.
did you? I think well, I don't know what your phrase was a moment ago. That global community. That's
Yes.
the point of it all. So, notwithstanding, climate change is about the global community.
Yeah.
We're all going to suffer.
Yeah.
In varying degrees over various timelines. Um, that's the point. The irony in all this is we are so interconnected. What's that old word, Gaia?
Yeah. Yeah.
Everything is connected.
Yeah.
And whether you call it globalization or whatever you want to call it, we have become so reliant on each other. And then when that chain breaks,
Yeah.
it
It's
has
a right mess.
such a
Yeah.
significance. We're seeing it. Obviously, we're seeing it now in Europe.
Yeah.
But trying to find a way in which we can stop beating the crap out of each other,
Yeah.
becomes the fundamental, because everybody in the end loses.
Yes.
Some power or empire, some ambition thinks it's winning or has won
Yeah.
something in the short term, but in the mid and especially long term, everybody's going to lose.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to sound like a complete, how can I put, idealist, but when are we ever going to stop kicking the shit out of each other?
Yes, would be nice.
So pathetic.
I know, and it does. Yes, I mean, yeah. It's also, I mean, I think there might be, we have a perspective, possibly in the UK, having been a former global empire power, before World War II, up till about then, that hangover is there. So even yesterday, I walked through London past numerous statues of incredibly aggressive oppressors of various countries that we smashed to pulp and put into slavery, and that history is our burden to carry. We did some really, really bad stuff around the world for about 400 years.
Well, we did,
time.
and not
we did some good stuff too. We put trains,
but not wishing to dilute what you've said. Many other people have as well. I mean, we could start going through a list, but probably not going to do it because it wouldn't be fair. But here's the thing, Rob. I saw a little graphic recently, a little sort of animated graph of the story of GDP, gross domestic product,
right?
History of that over since 1800. Have a guess, Rob, who the two most successful countries were in 1800 as measured by GDP.
Because I would have said the British Empire, but maybe am I not right?
Well, no, you would have been right after a time, but go back to 1800. It was China,
right, 1800.
significantly right. China,
and
India.
Wow.
And over time, between 1800 now, you're quite right, the British Empire takes the UK up on it, and then the two world wars pushes America right up on it.
Yeah.
Consumerism arrives, materialism arrives, all of these things, advertising arrives, all of these aspects to life come, ebb and flow. But then, both China and India diminish hugely, going back 100 years. Right. And then the rise of China is astonishing over the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. And now India, India as well, which of course, I wouldn't say suffers, but has to cope with being the world's biggest democracy. So it has the change in direction from time to time as those governments come and go. And China, of course, certainly of late, doesn't
have that problem.
3 decades. No, it doesn't have that problem. It can be a problem. Rob, let's not even. Should we go there? But even in this country, yes, we have democracy, but do we really? I mean, what have we had?
Well, it doesn't feel like it at the moment. No.
Yeah,
But we do. I think it's symbolic, and I think it's amazing. And I don't. This is not a criticism. I've got plenty of criticisms for the current, in large inverted commas, administration. But the simple fact is, a country that once theoretically owned India is now governed by an Indian.
Oh, I think
we have an Indian prime minister. It's fabulous. I think that's fantastic.
I love the way that's worked, and I think the irony of that, and there are many other words, but that's one of them. I think isn't lost on anyone, and no. I think it's really good that this happens.
Yeah, me too. We have an Indian mayor, or from the Indian subcontinent, from Pakistan background, mayor of London.
Yeah,
who's on the opposite political end of the political spectrum to the prime minister. I don't agree with anything that our current prime minister has probably ever said or thought. But I think it's fascinating that he is the prime minister, and
Yeah.
how that's happened is remarkable. And also that it's upset the really crazy loons on the extreme end of that political party. You know, they're not happy about it, or the membership.
It always will. It always
Yeah,
will, Rob. But given what you said earlier about our kind of checkered history, one of the good things certainly that's come out of that, I think, is that we do have a multicultural society,
yeah,
which to a
yeah,
certain extent is a reflection of that, empire that we had for all its, ills. But there were good
yeah,
things we did try and do as well.
yeah,
So I think in some ways, ironically, who we are today, the truth of who we are today, not necessarily some of the people that take the headlines. Um, we could be more integrated. There are aspects of how we live in this country that aren't what they could be. But overall, I think we're a pretty eclectic and multicultural
yeah.
and tolerant society. And don't think we should beat ourselves up so much.
No,
The minority of
no,
people
I
who
know.
don't have
Yeah,
that view,
yeah,
well, they can, I'm not interested in them, quite frankly. I'm interested
yeah,
in the majority of people,
yeah,
and the majority of people in the UK. I am for all the things that are good about who we are. Yeah, some of the other bits I'm not. I'm
yeah,
overall proud of to be British, but
yeah,
British in the context of some of the things I've just outlined, not
yeah.
necessarily
I think
some of the
the
other.
point I was trying to make wasn't to denigrate British, the British thing, but it was to point out that a nation that has experienced empire building and
Yeah,
then the demise of empire probably has a different view to say current Russian politics, where we want our land back and nationalism, and we must all be we're the best. You can say Britain is best, yeah, but it's comparative. That's all I'm saying. Maybe
well, it is.
the Chinese saying, it's like us saying we want the Isle of Wight back. Really, is what they're saying with Taiwan. It's
Yeah, well,
but
maybe.
maybe
I
not.
think
No.
the other bit in whatever slightly dissimilar views we might have on things is, of course, Rob, the fact that you are, I can tell by your name, Welsh at some point.
Well, by descent, yes.
That's,
We have three grandparents were very Welsh. Yeah.
there you go.
Um,
Anyway, should we
um,
go back to
we should go back to that,
yes,
because that. I mean, yes. Sorry, we went right off that, but I think it is. What we were started talking about is China, and
yes,
what I wanted to say about that was how the dominance of Chinese technology predates electric cars. If you and it is like you and I are now talking through a system where I can't tell what percentage of components that we're using to communicate this and record it, what percentage of components were made in China, but it will be high
yeah,
just by
yes,
default. Electronics they've been making electronics. I know this laptop I'm using was made in China. I know a lot of the components inside the routers that we are connected to the internet here. Then the systems in the server farms. That's where we have allowed that to happen. And I think there's now some moves to go, hang on, we ought to make stuff here. It's
yeah,
pretty important.
rebalance for sure. And
Yeah,
ironically, Rob, we started off talking about Elon Musk and Tesla, but let's not forget BYD. So
yes,
BYD, Build Your Dreams. Chairman Wang, who I think is a chemist, has built this amazing enterprise that isn't so familiar to many people. And again,
yeah,
just arrived in Europe, just announced
yeah,
their arrival with new product, a new ambition,
yeah,
very different to NIO, not doing battery swap, for example, going to use dealers, not like NIO, etc. So a more traditional sort of approach in that regard coming to market. But that's a truly significant company. I think the report that Elliot did on BYD in Shenzhen, must be a
yeah,
couple of years ago now,
yeah.
was fabulous, because it showed just how
The scale.
extraordinary you can make a city like Shenzhen with
Yeah,
all the
yeah,
thousands of buses and taxis and the management of energy. This is a very significant company in many
yeah,
ways. I wouldn't call it under the radar, but they certainly don't have the same profile of Tesla. But you could easily suggest they are as important
yeah.
as Tesla.
And it's
So
big. And I mean, that thing, if you catch a red London bus, in inverted commas, in
yeah,
London, an electric bus, just check the front, because it will say BYD on it.
yeah,
That's where
indeed,
they're all from.
indeed.
So they're made in China. It is very much part of our world, really, in that sense.
It is. Well, and very quickly, and I don't want to go off on a tangent about it, but I spent a week or so over in America earlier this year looking at wirelessly charged electric buses. They were all
Right,
BYD buses,
right.
incidentally, some of them charging up to 300 kilowatts.
Wow.
At a time. So whether it's battery swap with Neo and others, whether it's wireless charging that is
Yeah.
slowly emerging,
Yeah.
um, we are in this incredible space where innovation, technology, ambition, change, is all around us.
It's really quick, isn't it? And very hard
Yeah.
to keep up with. But then, because that would be good to just let's move on. Well, actually, one of the rather depressing stories to move on from, just because we know the company, we've covered them on Fully Charged Show, is Arrival.
Yes.
Remarkable stuff. They haven't quite done it, but when you go to their R&D department, and I know you've been there as well. The enthusiasm and the technology they're developing and the materials they're developing. So it is next generation stuff, but they actually aren't churning out vans yet, delivery vans. But
It's a
they're
bit
now going to
ironic.
do it in America. They're
Yeah,
taking it
it's
out
a
of the
bit of
UK.
an ironically named company, really, isn't it? Arrival.
Yes.
I mean, they haven't. And without wanting to sort of, kick him out when he's down, I'm sort of frustrated by it in a way, because
Yeah.
when I saw them, Matt, Rob, this honestly and truthfully is about 7 years ago.
Yes.
They
It's been a
initially
while.
were over at Enstone at the Renault Formula One facility when
Right.
it first, incorporated. And Modec had sort of, obviously the Modec electric van had come and
Yeah.
gone without getting into that and going through the detail. But I went over and said, happy to help, happy to share some thoughts, so on and so
Right.
forth. To be frank, at the time I needed some work. I was just starting out doing my own thing. And I thought, maybe they'll jump at the chance,
Yeah.
not necessarily just for me, but I know the engineers and some of the software guys from Modec, and thought, well, we could help them fast track stuff.
Yeah.
Here's the thing as I see it, and I don't want to sort of talk too much about the merit of the proposition or whatever. I think if you have to come to market with something like that within maximum 5 years, preferably 3 or 4, because
Yeah.
why? Number one, I think you start creating money, you've got revenue, you're
Yeah.
shipping product. Number two, you build more credibility because you're actually, you have got working capital. You are earning money. The business
Yeah.
is coming from revenue, and I just think they took too long. They kept
Yeah.
letting,
Yeah.
what's that? I never get this the right way around. They kept letting the great get in the way of the good. Is that the way around?
Yes.
Or is it the other
Yes.
way? You know what I
Yes.
mean? I think they forever were just trying to make something really fantastic rather than just build some bloody vans.
Yeah.
They look good. We all know you've got some cool stuff. Get it out there, please.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
and then, because Steve Jobs, go right back to the beginning of Apple, and others along the way have always worked on the principle of look, ship some product,
Yeah.
and then iterate and then improve. I mean, it's got to work. But if it needs finessing, if it needs a version 2 and operating
That's
system
fine. Yeah.
B, whatever they call it, get going with shipping your product. And that's not what they've done. And I think this is why we sadly see them hopping out of the UK and jumping over to the United States.
Yeah. No, it's a great shame. It is a shame.
It is, because it's could and should have been, and hopefully will be in its new incarnation, a very impressive organisation. I don't wish them ill at all, but
no.
I do think they should have got on with it a lot quicker.
Yeah. But then let's go to the United States, having mentioned that a few times. I mean, just the stuff that's happening there, I find fascinating. So General Motors and the Hummer, but I mean, they're churning out Hummers. It's that difference. This is the exact opposite in a way of Arrival. So General Motors, massive company, who've just made the most colossal profit in their history. So they're obviously doing very well, but they are stating they're going to transition their entire manufacturing of cars to electric in the next 5 years, which I'll believe it when it happens. But
can I be honest, Rob? I mean, the idea of having these updates and conversations with each other is we should say it as we see it.
Yes. Please.
Bored of GM keep telling everybody they're going to take over the world.
Going to go electric.
Vehicles. It's like, I think Ford are doing a better job of it, quite frankly.
Amazing. Yeah.
They're doing more of a job about it and less about talking about it. We're going to be market leaders. We're going to beat Tesla. Like, well, good. If you have that ambition, nothing wrong with it. But I know, keep it to yourself and show us by what you do.
Yeah.
And in America, I have to say, the one thing that I am jealous about, let's be frank, is that they are now coming out with not just policy, but then action to
Yeah.
enable this electric vehicle revolution, particularly the Inflation Reduction Act, which got some weird things in it because some of it is about supporting fossil fuel stuff. But
Yeah.
overall, and even as recently as last week, they've released billions of dollars to support specific companies in the supply chain of
Right.
building battery factories. And what have we seen in the UK?
Yeah.
Nothing. You know,
Nothing at all.
last week they announced, I think it was 200 million, Jacob Rees-Mogg. So I almost ignored it because it came out of his mouth, but
Yeah.
it was 200 million or something to support the Faraday Institute. Yeah, great. Mate, that's nothing. You know, you
Yeah.
don't understand the significance and scale and scope of what we need to do.
Yeah.
And too many times it's been 50 million here, 100 million there. It's like, just go for this properly, because
Yeah.
otherwise half of this money ends up paying for expensive consultants to talk about stuff,
Yeah.
or they're forever reviewing the opportunity, scoping it's like, buy stuff, build things, ship
Yeah.
stuff, learn the lesson of what we were going through a moment
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
So I think underneath GM, Ford, Rivian, Tesla, all of these other people, what the American government is doing that is significantly important is they're getting on with helping support and sponsor and build the infrastructure around supply chains, particularly. So yeah, well, good luck to GM. I hope they do,
Yeah.
do these wonderful things. But I wish them to just talk about it a bit less and
Yeah.
do
Talk
a
about it a
lot
bit
more
less
about
and
it.
yeah.
Because
I mean,
anyway.
they are churning out. I mean, I just think the most ridiculous vehicle. I've driven the old-fashioned Hummer, and it was just incredible. The most embarrassing thing to sit in traffic in Los Angeles.
Yeah, well,
the civilian Hummer is the most stupid bloody car.
Well, Rob, I'm with you, but for me, some people might think the Ford F-150 is a similar story.
It's a
But
monster. Yeah.
well, reading Jeremy Clarkson's review of it in Sunday Times at the weekend was fascinating, because he says he doesn't like electric vehicles, number one, and he doesn't like pickup trucks, number two.
Yeah.
And then he said, number three, I love this vehicle. They think, whoa. And the thing there for me, I think that is possibly at the moment the most significant electric vehicle on the planet.
Yeah.
Why? Because it goes for the quintessential, absolutely, pivotal, load lugging. Am I allowed to say redneck? Probably not.
I think
just
you
did.
can.
Car that goes to the very heart of so many people that are anti-electric vehicle.
Yeah.
So many people. And the huge profit proposition for Ford has been for years the F-150.
Massive pickups, yeah.
So to make it electric, and to then make it significantly electric in that it's not just a vehicle, it's an appliance. You could charge up the home, charge up power tools, vehicle to X, all of that stuff, battery to X. It is massive. I think Ford with the F-150 Lightning, to me, of late, the last couple of years, is the biggest and most significant EV story. I really, really do. Regardless of the fact it's a great big, monster truck.
Yeah. No, I sat in the one in San Diego in Nicky's, and it's just I didn't drive it, just sat in it and just went, oh, yeah. I mean, I can imagine driving 250 miles in that car without a second thought, without worrying about anything, very comfortable. This huge lump of stuff in front of you. It's just a monstrously vast thing.
Yeah.
But, I mean, she'd driven down from Portland, Oregon, which, in our sort of narrow British Isles European vision, I can't work out what that distance is, but it's more than north of Scotland to Cornwall. It is.
Yeah, I'm just looking at a map now. It absolutely is, Rob. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's about 800 miles, maybe.
I'd think it was more than that, actually.
Something, or maybe 1,000.
Yeah, it's certainly a long. It's knocking 1,000 miles, I would think. And she just did it without thinking. They didn't have to stop and charge it.
You know what? Talking about that location, thank you for letting me be part of what you did in America, in San Diego. And what I think was fascinating was, yes, Nikki Gordon Bloomfield very kindly brought her car along. I was supposed to have one, to be honest with you, but that's another story. Didn't work out. But she had her car there, and yes, people were very interested in it. But what was the star of the show? Let's be honest here. It was the small, completely, innovative Aptera.
Yeah.
the whole show, the whole 3 days, the
Was
thing was,
pivoted around that, really, wasn't it?
oh,
Yeah,
it was extraordinary.
yeah,
So I think there's an appetite for change. There is an appetite for, small is beautiful, small is
yeah.
better. We
Yes,
don't
I
just
hope
need
so.
everything,
Yeah,
but it's an evolution. So we've got to take people on the journey, help them, and encourage them, or whatever. But
yeah,
yeah, that the event, the Fully Charged Live event in San Diego, I thought was fascinating.
yeah,
That there you were in America, and the star of the show wasn't a great big vehicle. It was
yeah. It
something
was really super
significantly
lightweight,
different.
super efficient. I mean, that was the frustration for me after we unveiled it right at the beginning. When I did have I did before the show opened, I got a chance to look around. I never saw it again because I couldn't get anywhere near it because it was. I just look. There's a crowd of people over there, and inside that crowd is an Aptera. I couldn't get anywhere near it. It was very, very popular, wasn't it? But it
Yeah,
does seem to be I think the thing that keeps me fractionally optimistic in an otherwise crazy world is the fact that this stuff is going on regardless. That this shift is happening globally. So if there's a government anywhere in the world, like in Australia, there has been like we do have now, where there'll be a sort of it's not they're going to stop it, but there's sort of sludge in the way of progress. It's still going to happen somewhere. So if it's not happening here, it's happening in the Netherlands, in Denmark, in Norway, in the United States, in Australia now. It's a phenomenal changes happening in Australia. It
yeah.
is happening in China. Mind-boggling changes going on.
You're right, but I would err a little bit of caution on this. In that, I had an interesting conversation with Quentin Wilson
Right.
last week at the Google headquarters as part of a Camden Clean Air Initiative
Yes.
event.
Oh, I didn't realize Quentin was there as well. I saw it. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and indeed, but what Quentin was just sort of suggesting, just look around you. There are people and things now that are starting to row back on this
Oh,
because
yeah.
of exactly what you said. The success and momentum now
Yeah.
around the adoption of electric vehicles. It has woken up the industry
Yeah.
finally overall, but it's also woken up the dissenters and the
Yeah.
people that are like, oh, hang on a second, this really is happening. How do we slow it down? How do
Yeah.
we maybe not stop it, but how do we sort of push this back? So there are people, and often they're people with significant resources,
Yeah.
etc., who are looking at trying to push this back. I think you see this particularly now in the discussion, the narrative around mining and
Yeah.
mineral processing.
Yeah.
It's a bit like, you're a champion, so is Dan, quite rightly, the whole team is, of stop burning stuff.
Yeah.
The challenge we've got, Rob, is that we can't stop digging stuff up.
No.
And this digging stuff up has some pretty
Oh,
significant
very
consequences.
significant. Yeah.
Where we dig it up, how we dig it up, what we leave behind us, etc. So,
Yeah.
notwithstanding how this is going on commercially around the world, the dominance of Asia, etc., the shift towards greater electrification means a lot more batteries, as it does for renewable
Yeah.
energy as well, storage, and reconciling the whole thing around, well, what does it mean for the not just carbon footprint? The overall ambition of reducing CO2 is, of course, at the core of all this, but how do we make this as least damaging as possible? But we
Yeah.
can't kid ourselves that mining isn't disruptive
Yeah.
and doesn't have some challenges in how we get it. Cleaning it up, making it better, finding innovation in it, using better technology. That is happening. You've got all sorts of people around the world doing this now. The acquisition of Williams Advanced Engineering by the Australian mining company. Oh God, what's the name? See, you shouldn't have
See,
said
we've
what you
done
said
it.
at the beginning.
Damn. We've done
Now I
so
can't
well up
remember
to
the
now.
name. Anyway, I will in a second.
Yeah.
Illustrates that people are trying to find things like there's an infinity train, for example, where this enormous train that shifts minerals across Australia, huge
Yeah.
distances, is so heavy and full of stuff in one direction that it can pick up all of that kinetic energy it's otherwise would be wasting,
Right.
put it into batteries, and then use it to send the train back to the mine in the other direction.
Wow.
So there are extraordinary things happening now around innovation in and
Yeah.
around mining. But we can't get away from the fact that it is disruptive to communities. And I don't just mean Australia, Africa and the DRC and cobalt.
Yeah.
I mean all over the world, because
Yeah.
even closer to home, the mining for lithium in Slovakia has already kicked off a lot of consumer pushback. And you
Right.
do wonder, who's inspired that? Is that genuinely about, individuals and communities, or is
Yeah.
someone behind the scenes here pulling some
Yeah.
strings? I don't want to sound like an alarmist or a
No, but
conspiracy theorist, but Rob,
yeah,
we've been here before with these things. We know how these
absolutely.
things work.
Because that's, I mean, it's one of the, I'm just going to checking a name now so I get it. It's Simon Evans, Dr. Simon Evans, who I've just done a podcast with recently, has just published just a simple list of the CO2 output of various activities. And far and away, by such a vast multi-trillion ton margin, is the use of fossil fuels. I mean, I'm just putting this into a perspective that I hadn't had before. Because I'll get a torrent of tweets or comments on YouTube from someone who's just literally that morning gone, hang on, all these fancy electric cars, where does all the materials come from? And they just go through it in the most plodding way, effectively, totally ignoring the impact that our fossil fuel use has on the planet. And I absolutely accept everything you say, and we have to. Well, as a mining expert I interviewed in Australia said, by 2050 we've got to stop digging up, which I thought was quite an interesting perspective. We've got to recycle and use those materials again, and all those things. We both know that, and we've discussed that before. But the impact of extracting, transporting, refining, and burning fossil fuels is still 1 trillion times worse than any mining we've ever done. And that's no excuse to do bad mining or not care about it, but it's just to put it in perspective. There is an overarching need for us to change how we do stuff.
Shows like yours, Rob, and your team, and if I can in my own small way as well, and others, we need to help establish that narrative. We need to get that balanced perspective. Otherwise, people will hear the loudest voices and will start to push back on it. So I think what you've just said is significantly important. But there are people doing that. It was Fortescue Metals Group.
Fortescue Metals. So they've bought Williams, have they?
Williams Engineering. Williams Advanced Engineering. So they're looking at using that, Formula One technology to, fast track improvements, significant improvements in and around mining. So when you do your show in Australia, there's no doubt in my mind you should have that company, and the guy that runs it is quite a significant and high-profile individual. Twiggy, I think his nickname is.
Yes.
Anyway, you should definitely have. I'm sure they'd love to be as part of the event in Australia, because I know you're going around the world doing this now, quite rightly. And I know you've got skin in the game, as it were, in terms of knowledge and awareness of Australia, because your wife's Australian, etc. Nothing to do with you used to be in a band called the Joeys. That's completely unrelated.
There's no connection.
It's just weird coincidence. But yeah, I think this could be and should be something that I hope you're going to weave into some of the. Well, you already have, obviously, podcasts, your mining chat you mentioned, but other people. I think it'd be good. And then, Rob, the other one I wanted to mention to you, you should try and get on as a guest, either podcast or a video, John Elkington.
Oh.
John Elkington is an environment. He's 70 something. Rob is even older than you.
No, I didn't realise that was possible.
Right, well, there you are. So John co-authored the Green Consumer Guide with Anita Roddick in the 1970s.
Oh, yeah.
He's written lots of books. Significant person in this whole arena. Most recently wrote a book called Green Swans, The Coming Boom in Regenerative Capitalism. And this was about how orientating the shift to renewables, to electric vehicles, to many other things, through the lens of commercial gain, advantage, profit, etc., was a good thing, because that would get the people behind it, the people with money and power behind it. And he's incredibly articulate, hugely knowledgeable. He's a lovely human being, and his delivery is calm, and very specific. He's one of the most interesting people I've ever met.
Wow.
And I would utterly recommend him to be, in your orbit, part of the fully charged narrative, because
I don't know his name. I do remember the Green Consumer Guide. That's the only one I've heard of. Anita Roddick. Oh my goodness. No, thank you for that. That's a very good steer. I've been feverishly writing notes.
Very
This
good.
is a live data swap episode or something. But I mean, well, the two that I really I do want to make sure we do cover, which is in terms of car makers, is Japan and South Korea. So half our crew are currently in South Korea. They're filming there now with Hyundai, and there's a lot of stuff going, a lot of other things as well they're seeing. And they seem to, it's really interesting. So South Korea, this is a very shallow take, but seems to be on the front foot regarding alternative fuels and not alternative fuels, but alternatives to combustion engines. So electric vehicles and all that stuff. They've done incredibly well. Kia and Hyundai have done amazing electric cars that are. We had a Kona for 4 years and it was fantastic. It was faultless. Its range was magic. How the hell did it go that far on that size of battery? Really, really, simple car that worked really well.
I'd agree with you, Rob. I think, again, not under the radar as such, because people are familiar with some of the products you just mentioned, and Hyundai and Kia, the performance of their batteries, the engineering of the vehicles is significantly, impressive. And also they have been building out the infrastructure around this, not unlike China. So companies like SK Innovation and, the big battery arena, the big battery companies with their supply chains are Japan, well, in this order of magnitude, China, South Korea, Japan, and then others, but they're absolutely there. So, Hyundai is a conglomerate, an enormous enterprise, which is
huge
incredibly
company.
well run, has now all of these different divisions and aspects that join up, that cooperate with each other, that accelerate, change and performance and development, share that technology. That they are, for a relatively small country, they are an extremely significant player in where we are now. So I'm unsurprised you've got people filming there, because I'm sure there's a ton of stuff we don't even know about now. But that's why you go to these places to tell us, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. But then the flip side of that is I'm fascinated by Toyota. So my relationship with Toyota, that was the first car company I ever had a relationship with. I didn't even know you could have them, but they supported Carpool, the show I used to do in a Prius.
Yes.
That they gave me a free Prius for a year to film in, and they then sponsored the show I did on Channel 4 of Carpool. That they funded it effectively.
Yeah, but
so I had a very strong relationship with them on that, and that was because I thought the Prius was a really important vehicle. It was a real big transition, but I knew it was a transition to fully electric vehicles even then, because I'd seen a few in America and I went, that's what's going to happen. But these are brilliant now. This is in the mid noughties, 15, 20 years ago. But then it's so weird, because they've then did the hydrogen thing, and the boss said it's going to be hydrogen and all that. And they've really, I feel sorry for them. They really tried. They didn't half-heartedly do it.
Yeah, I think within any nation, within any kind of arena, any region, when you've got to look under the surface of why is this stuff happening, so take China. China's got a relatively youthful population, young people. It's a dynamic society, etc. You've got South Korea, pretty similar. High-tech society, relatively young, youthful, vibrant economy. Without getting into the politics side of things, that's important too. But then if you look at Japan, it's an aging population, very, very much so. And I think it has failed to capitalize on the extraordinary lead it delivered with the Prius, with Toyota's Prius. And I think for cultural reasons, operational reasons, a bundle of reasons, I think it's quite frustrating and alarming that a company so significant as Toyota has kind of faltered in this way. But of course, it isn't just about Toyota. There are other significant companies, in Japan, and we shouldn't. And it would be foolish to just sort of write them off as, they lost the plot. Lost the plot. Everyone else is sort of taking over, and that's kind of where it is, because because I don't think that's the case. And again, they have been significant players in batteries. Let's not forget,
Yeah,
and you go right back to consumer electronics and Sony identifying that to liberate the consumer electronics industry, particularly handheld devices and other things like
yeah,
that, that was predicated on energy management and batteries.
yeah,
Ironically, Rob, that's what the Chinese learnt from. They
yeah,
observed that you have to have these two components, typically these twin supporting aspects of a revolution to make it work. So they saw that with the Japanese and the Koreans to a certain extent, South Koreans with consumer electronics and batteries. And then when they had the vision for new energy vehicles, aka electric vehicles, they
yeah,
knew that had to go with the battery
yeah,
revolution, which
yeah.
is why they started hoovering up the resources around the world
And
for
20
battery
years ago they
manufacturing.
started, didn't they? Not last week, a long time ago.
Oh,
Yeah,
well, nigh on 10 years at
yeah,
least. So the Made in China 2025 strategy had within it a number of key areas,
right.
in terms of, domestic and international ambition. New
Right.
energy vehicles, electric vehicles was one of them. AI was another one of them.
Yeah.
But certainly, the raw materials of batteries, which is why they've, encouraged and helped support and develop CATL,
Yeah.
the biggest. Did you know one company, CATL, supply 1/3 of the world's battery cells for
Wow.
batteries? One
Wow.
company. I mean, that just can't be good. That's
No,
just not
it's
good.
not a good thing. No, no, it
So
is.
yeah, but what's your view then on Japan, Rob? Because you've been there, and here's the thing. So
Yeah.
Nissan, there's Nissan with the Leaf,
Yes. No,
and
Nissan did amazingly well.
you famously, well, certainly famously in my mind, were for a period of time. I think it was only on one occasion, but were Carlos Ghosn's chauffeur,
Yeah.
driving him to the airport in London, having that conversation about his ambition at the time, which was
Yeah.
significant. And what's that?
Really significant. Yeah.
12, 15 years ago, Rob? A long time ago.
It was probably 10 years ago that I drove him. Yeah, I would think it was at least that. Well, that was, and also interestingly, the reason I got to do that was because his personal assistant had been personal assistant to Elon Musk up until 6 months before we recorded that. That's how I first met Elon and first went to Tesla, like right before the Model S. Was when the Roadster was just
Yeah, yeah.
about coming out. Even, I mean, really early, even in terms of the Roadster. But anyway, that's another thing. I think what is significant, and there's a story. I'll put a link of this in the show notes. There's a story out in Reuters today about Toyota absolutely turning the ship. So they've been, electric vehicles are never going to work. They're never going to work. And the boss says they're not going to work. We need hydrogen or we need hybrids. And they've now said, right, we're doing battery electric vehicles. Big time. I mean, they're spending trillions, if not, because they're the big, effectively, it's really a toss-up between them and VW, who is the biggest manufacturer in the world. And I think Toyota certainly have been the biggest.
They
So
have.
it's a really significant thing. So if they genuinely do, because the one fully electric vehicle they've had out now, and this is a personal frustration, it doesn't have any reflection on anything else, but because I've sort of fallen out with them in terms of the PR, I've tried not to. I've been ever so nice and sent them lots of nice messages, but because I've been very critical of the self-charging PR nonsense that they've been using,
Yes.
that's kind of annoyed them, which I can understand.
Well, but before we move away from Japan, what we shouldn't fail to reference is the Honda and Sony
Yes,
tie-up.
yeah,
This could be very, very significant, I
yeah.
think.
I'd forgotten about that. That's a good point. Yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
and I think it's been around now as a kind of announcement for I don't know what, I suppose about a year,
um,
18 months.
yeah. I mean, has it been officially acknowledged? That is
Oh,
a genuine
100%,
thing,
yes,
right?
yes, indeed, and I think we might all be surprised by just what that might
Yeah,
manifest itself
yeah,
with, because they're both companies with vast experience, incredible people, great
yeah,
R&D facilities, etc., and of course, I suppose like Toyota too, in truth, a global footprint. Because just jumping around a little bit, going back to why is Neo significant, it's because they've taken software from California, from the
yeah,
Americans, they've taken engineering from Germany, and they're
yeah.
taking manufacturing from within China. And I think
Right.
the smartest companies around the world now are cherry picking the best
Yeah,
aspects of how you bring a vehicle together,
yeah,
from different talent and experience, etc., rather than trying to do it all in house, if you like.
Yeah.
or acquiring companies to, in effect, do it in a similar way. Um, so yeah, I'd be quite optimistic about this Honda Sony
Right.
electric vehicle proposition.
Yeah. Um, Good. That's very good. And we also shouldn't go on too long because I don't want to go on for hours, and also I don't want to take up more of your time. But that's it's
Well,
been
Rob, at the moment, I'm kind of a bit
yeah.
housebound because I two prime ministers ago, I tripped over and fell in the street in London. Hadn't been drinking. I had been all
Right.
day at a brewery. I know that's whatever, but it's not a proper brewery. That's just a meeting place. It was at
Yeah.
the Green Tech Festival with Nico Rosberg, and then had a great day. I was in a great mood, very happy. Walked out of the place, down the road, started to rain, slipped over, crashed, broke my arm.
Wow.
Bunch of stuff's happened in between. Not going to bore everybody.
Yeah.
But what it means is I can't drive at the moment, so I'm frustrated as hell because
You're
this
stuck
week,
at home. Yeah.
the week we're recording this, should have been London. A number of things to do with the London Metals Week, which is all
Right.
about minerals and
Critically
supply
important.
chain, all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been invited to a number of things where I'd have learned a lot and would have been able to share a bunch of stuff with
Yeah.
my LinkedIn friends. But I'm here at home having to get taken here and there by everybody. I did come into London recently to an event because the lovely people from EZoo, who, by the way, I'm going to be working with, but I'm
good.
going to be sharing something on that later. They kindly took me in. I got chauffeured in and out of London.
Oh,
It was
nice.
it was like being a cheese. It was like being a big cheese.
Yeah.
But
Did they take you to? Did you like pull up outside the door and just get out like a proper politician?
Yeah, but I'm really disappointed, Rob, because not one person took a photograph. There was no flash.
Damn, I wish I'd been there. I could have done. I could have
it was
flashed
like,
off a few.
who's he then? What's happened to him? What's happened to the old bloke?
Yeah. No, because I want to just explain to the listeners in particular that Roger has a sling on his left arm. But also, when you first mentioned it, I was laughing, but I wasn't laughing about your arm. It was about the way you introduced it. So I'm not laughing at your expense.
No,
I just want to make that clear. I knew you'd know, but I just wanted to make sure the listeners knew that.
I've got a thick skin. And I mean, and funny enough, one of the themes at the event that I was at all day, just before I did it, was expect the unexpected.
Yes.
Well, clearly I hadn't been listening, had I? Because I didn't.
Yeah. Oh, God. But then, because yesterday I went to a offshore wind energy. I guess it was not really a conference; it was just a meeting, and it was all the offshore wind people. So it was Vestas and Siemens Gamesa and Renewables UK and Ripple. Sarah Merrick did a talk, and it was interesting. It was quite a small event at the Houses of Parliament on the terrace overlooking the Thames, which I've never been on before, and really interesting stuff going on there. And that just a few of the key points that I did note down, because but it was the number of jobs really and how big this is. So they're talking about 100,000 jobs and 150 billion pounds in private investment. This is not public money. And I think, there is a side of me that now wants, like when they're going, the government should fund car charging. No, it shouldn't. It's a private company should fund car charging. It's a business. I don't want
what the government should do is enable
it and facilitate
a long-term strategy or legislation sort of framework that gives people the confidence to do that. All this to-in and fro-in nonsense. What? We've had 6 ministers heading up the BEIS, the Department of Industry and whatever, essentially our shop window of what we're good at to the world. Since 2019, we've had six different things. The most recent one, thank God he's gone, was Jacob Rees-Mogg. I mean, I wouldn't give that guy the time of day. Honestly, I could rant like a lunatic about him. How dare somebody be like him?
Yeah.
The man just shrivels my...
if you're, it's a really easy thing to explain to people not in the UK why we feel like this, because I feel exactly the same. When you just have to Google Jacob Rees-Mogg and you will, and then just look at images. Don't read about him. Just look at the images, and you're looking at a living Victorian. Somehow, a man who has survived for the last 150 years without changing anything, including his attitudes to people who live in other countries. literally Victorian attitudes writ large. He basically wants us to go back to coal and steam.
Yes, and part of that reason is, of course, is because he's got vested interest through investments in those very things.
Yeah.
So this is somebody who, not is.
We shouldn't waste our brain power talking about it. He's out of government. He's been booted out now, which is great.
Good.
And actually, my good friend Grant Shapps has taken over his job.
Has he? I didn't know who the new one was.
That happened last night, yesterday. Yeah.
Could you ask him to maybe stay in that job for at least
a bit longer?
Well, no, seriously, Rob. If you were to invest in a company and you looked at, excuse me, you looked at how long certain people, the directors, had been in position. If you saw that they'd had 6, in a very important
CEOs in the last 4 years,
you wouldn't invest in them.
No.
So please say to your friend Grant, however he can manage it with the new Prime Minister, who appears to be a reasonably intelligent human being, can at least do joined up writing. Please stay in post for at least 2 years. Get to understand the brief. Work with us all. Work with people like you and others, and people like Simon Moores, and people who know the background and detail to this, or can introduce people to these people, and we'll all help. We don't necessarily want any money. We don't want to be consultants and get paid. We want to help our country and our continent and the world get these things done. So, I'm pleased to hear that. I just want him to stay in the post for at least a couple of years, please.
Yeah. Because that was the frustrating thing yesterday, was the caliber of the people I met there. So I knew some of the people who work at Siemens or GE making wind turbines, or there's 1 or 2 people I'd met before in that, like Sarah Merrick from Ripple Energy. But there were all these people I've never met before who are working green investment banking in really background infrastructure management and the legalities of running a massive high power cable from the middle of the North Sea onshore, and where do you build the substation, and how do you get planning permission for that, and how do you facilitate that? The people who do that, the kind of grunt work that none of us are aware of. That's not a big, if you see the picture of North Sea offshore wind, you see hundreds of big wind turbines out at sea on a lovely sunny day. You don't see a substation. No one takes glamour shots of substations or cable or ships that lay huge cables that make that stuff work. Because we're looking at 50 gigawatts of wind by 2030, offshore wind, which is phenomenal.
On a similar theme, I haven't watched it yet. I keep meaning to, because I talked to Imogen, one of your presenters, Imogen Pierce, about this, about the cables and the whole national grid stuff that sits and works all underneath London,
underneath the ground,
preparation for the requirement for more power, more electric vehicles, so on and so forth. That stuff's astonishing. I only briefly looked at the resume, but I will watch that video, because this is what I like about what you're doing, Rob. You're becoming, I think, quite broad brush, quite eclectic, quite forensic now in how the architecture of all of this works. Yes, we want to look at shiny cars and go for a drive in there. That's always nice. But what's more significant is what are the pieces in and around this? What's that phrase? The ecosystem of it all that makes it happen, that makes it credible. So I like, I particularly like. I've worked with Imogen on something I've recorded myself called Motorsport in the Electric Age, by the way, which isn't out yet, because frustratingly I've had to keep tweaking things in it. But Imogen, because she's an aerodynamicist by profession, and because she's very intelligent, presents so well. I love what she's doing. I love what Jack's doing. Oh, and by the way, congratulations on, I saw it the other day, his video on the ID Buzz has had over 1 million views. I mean, it had that quite quickly. So you do clearly have an amazing audience. I'd be very surprised if your YouTube channel doesn't get 1 million followers before too long. So I think you're pretty close to it. But that's because I think you're, if you don't mind me saying so, I hope this doesn't sound like a backhanded compliment. I think because you're upping your game.
Yes, absolutely.
You are, really getting into the guts of all of this. And I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. No, that's very kind. I mean, that is definitely the intention, is the in a sense, it's driven by that same thing that hit me 12 years ago, which is I drove an electric car for the first time, and then I got back in a petrol car without a second thought. I went, oh, hang on, where does the petrol come from? Where, and if you think I was in my, I guess, early 50s, I'd never thought about it. I'd driven
Yeah.
petrol cars every day since I was 17 without a second thought. And then, I mean, I had that weird advantage of having done a TV show when none of this occurred to me while we were doing this, but a TV show from the biggest oil refinery in the UK in West Pembrokeshire.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah.
And I loved it because it was fascinating engineering, how that, when you look inside the furnace of the cracking tower, it is a vision of hell. It's unbelievable amount of power and energy and heat and consumption of crude oil and electricity to create that heat to crack oil up that big tower. That's what those big towers. It's just fascinating how they do it.
Yes.
But it didn't occur to me that because it was just normal. That is normal. And I think in a way, our ignorance of where petrol comes from has led to the mess we're in now. And I think we've got to educate people that, wait a minute, where does your electricity come from? You really need to know this. It's really important. It will affect you because when it goes wrong, that it will get a lot more expensive, which is what it's done now. If we rely on gas, then we're going to have suddenly very cheap or suddenly very expensive electricity. I mean, the price of gas has collapsed, which is so weird and so annoying.
No, that's because the stocking up in preparation for the winter and the whole thing that's going on with there's a guy called Gerald, his name escapes me again, who's very forensic with this on LinkedIn.
Right.
Puts up really good stuff. Gerald Reed, that's it. Gerald Reed, if anyone wants to look at it.
All right.
And he had a post on this only yesterday, Rob. This is only a temporary thing. It's because in reaction to and in anticipation of all that's going on with Ukraine and Russia, and then across Europe, we've now got a lot of storage, all kind of they're ready and willing. The real challenge now is what sort of winter are we going to have?
Yeah.
How severe and how long a cold winter are we going to have?
Yeah.
Because if that starts kicking in, and we all know at the moment here in Europe, as at the very end of October, it hasn't kicked in.
No, it's very
mild. As and when we get into December or January, February, and we really get some long cold periods, all of that stock will diminish, of course, because it'll be drawn out. And that's then when the price will go back up again. Yeah. But just coming back to a few things you've just said, and I have talked to Dan about this before. You have an amazing audience. We've talked about it a bit here with numbers and YouTube, but do you know what, Rob? I'd love to see what you're doing broaden into mainstream television, whether that's BBC, Channel 4, whatever, because I do think you're absolutely right to inform, entertain, and educate the public around the realities to these things is probably more apt now than any time before. People, because of the horrendous cost of energy now, are so focused on it. And I think now this is an opportunity, ironically, to build on that challenging reality and help people understand how to use less, how to be more efficient, how to consider all of the kind of things that go on around us. I really do think that whoever commissions things on television, and I guess you know a bit about this, really should be looking at getting, what's that old Reithian maxim? Inform, educate, entertain. Putting this stuff out there from what you and your team do, I think is never more timely than now.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's a tough thing. And I mean, I'm a heavily scarred old media rhino of having, countless hundreds of meetings at the BBC and at Channel 4, and like trying to get things on. And I've been, the thing is, it's not been a total disaster. I've had some great successes and incredible privileged jobs that I've had on old school TV. I'm very aware of that. But my God, I've pitched a lot that never made it. And 90% of that is a huge relief it never made it. They were rubbish ideas. But Fully Charged was pitched to the BBC. I mean, in 2009. And they weren't nasty. They really wanted to do something with me, but they just did not understand what I was talking about. But it was too early.
What a different world we live in now. I know. From 2009, and surely with your friends and I know you weren't name dropping, but if you've got a friend like Grant Shapps, surely
I don't know
between,
that I can really call him a friend.
well, okay, you saw him once.
I've interviewed him a couple of times, and
You
he
saw
came
him
to
once
Fully
in a
Charged
shop.
Live.
That's the truth of it, isn't it?
No, he came to Fully Charged Live, and he was lovely. He was very so enthusiastic about what we were doing, so that was great.
Well, look, far be it for me to tell you how to go about things, but tap into these things, use these people, get this stuff on television, because the more people that see it, and it's not about shoving it down people's throats.
No,
it's about giving people those three dynamics: information, education, entertainment. And you've got such, your own stock, personality, whatever. I think there are many people, in particular for me, if I'm really frank with you, the thing that stands out for me in your body of work was Scrapheap Challenge. I don't mind Red Dwarf; it's all right. But the thing, the thing for me that I think was so prescient was Scrapheap Challenge. Was about it's about sustainability. It's about making things out of stuff that people have thrown away. All of this is really, really important. So, you don't need me to tell you your credentials are there. And because you now have this, sophisticated team of presenters with all sorts of backgrounds, surely now's the time to jump on that. Do it, Rob. Do it.
Let's see. I won't talk about it because there are some things in the works, but there's nothing solid yet. Otherwise, I'd be ranting on about it. But it's certainly something we're very seriously considering. Good. It's no question of it.
Good,
Roger. I've got to let you go.
Well,
even though you're stuck at home.
Well, we've got to let everybody else go, because they'll be thinking, is this never going to end?
When are these two old gits going to shut up?
Jesus, it's like a nightmare show. On and on and on.
Yeah, there's loads of things I still want to cover, but anyway, we must get on. I've got to go down the dump. I'm quite excited. I'm going down the recycling. It's not the dump.
Is it a Scrapheap Challenge episode?
I wish it was. No, but I'm literally we've just cleared out various bits of house, which is always nice. There's a bit more room in my little studio than there was last weekend. So
very good. Very good.
So I've got to go and do that. But really good to talk to you. We're going to we'll talk to you offline, but we're definitely going to be doing some podcasts, which I would love you to be on, a little team, like a little think Fox News, where we all rant about Obama and his passport or something like that.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I'm
not onto that. Will I have to put two shirts on to appear?
I think you need at least two different shirts. Yeah.
All right. Very good.
Good.
Excellent.
Anyway, thanks so much, Roger, and we'll see you again soon. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. It was great fun catching up with Roger. Just quickly want to mention Australia next year. We are going to be in Sydney on the 11th and 12th of March. We're really excited about it. There's a lot of people going to be there. Let me just leave it at that. When I say people, I do mean people, actual human beings, but a lot of companies that are really exciting, that are doing amazing things in Australia and in the Southern Hemisphere. We've had an incredibly good response to the launch of the Sydney show, and we're really, really excited and looking forward to it. That's all. Please do subscribe. Please tell your friends about this podcast. We've got some amazing people coming up. In about 12 minutes, I'm going to record another episode, which will go out in a couple of weeks' time. But really, some fascinating people are on the cards, some really contentious people, much more contentious than me, but fascinating and very, very well informed. That's all. As always, if you have been, thank you for listening.